July 4th. I didn't get to preach a July 4th sermon, so you get it now. 1776. Is that the right date? Our nation declared its independence from Great Britain. Freedom to worship as we saw fit. Freedom from the oppression of the Roman Catholic Church. Freedom from taxation without representation. Freedom from a lot of things that were going on at that particular time. And I think we would be remiss if we didn't remember all the men and women who fought and died on our behalf for those freedoms, knowing that providentially God was with them, providentially that God aided them in their quest to build a new nation where all men were created equal, where we had the freedoms and have the freedoms that we do enjoy today. We have to be grateful for those things. This morning I want to take a look at a man by the name of Gideon. You may have heard about him. But Gideon was a mighty man of valor. What makes Gideon a man of God who God chose for His purpose? What made him that individual? I want you to understand that Gideon is an example of what trust can do for an individual. If they just have faith in God, if they have faith in the power of God, what can happen? As we begin this particular lesson, Gideon is given signs by God. You look at Judges 6, basically 17 through 21, but we're going to look at 25 through 31. Well, I'm not going to look at those. I want you to look at the idea. Number one, the sacrifice is accepted of God. I don't know why I didn't put that on there, but it's not on there. But the sacrifice is accepted of God. Remember, we just read from Judges. He says, take the young bullock, put it on the altar, tear down the other altar. God accepts the sacrifice that Gideon offers. The first idea that he is a sign, that God has accepted what Gideon has offered up on his behalf. A nod of approval in Gideon's direction. Strengthening and encouraging Gideon to stay the path, to do the right thing. Judges 6, 35, 33 through 35. Again, the Midianites we are coming. We've got the Amalekites are amassing. We have that vision of that second fleece that's there. We see the hand of God at work in the life of Gideon. We see Gideon becoming something greater than what he was by the influence of God. We see a strength and a courage building up within Gideon to be the person that he is able to be simply by a trust in God. We see that God's hand is at work in Gideon's life, and God makes Gideon know that He is there. And in our country, and you heard the prayers that were offered up during the Bible class, you heard the prayers offered up during worship. We know the direction our country is headed. It's not a secret to anybody. When the leader of a nation promotes homosexuality, when they promote abortion, we know that we are in trouble. But this is not something that just sprang up recently. This has been a path that our nation has been on for years. And it keeps heading in that direction. But God still gives us encouragement. He still shows us signs that He is with us through providence. Just last week, the 20-week abortion, they put a ban on abortions above 20 weeks. Again, God's providential care. But God is not going to do it alone. He expects us to do things as well. But this mighty man was given to save Israel. You look at Judges 6, 25 through 31. It came to pass that same night that the Lord said to him, take thy father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years old. Throw it down on the altar of Baal that thy father hath cut down the grove that is by. Build an altar unto the Lord thy God upon the top of this rock, and order the place, and take the second bullock, and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the grove which thou shalt cut down. Then Gideon took 10 of his men servants, and did as the Lord had commanded him. And so it was, because he feared his father's household and the men of the city, that he could do it by day. We go into verse 28. When the men of the city arose early in the morning, behold, the altar of Baal was cast down. The grove was cut down that was by. The second bullock was offered upon the altar that was built. And they said one to another, Who hath done this thing? And when they inquired and asked, they said, Gideon the son of Joash hath done this thing. Then the men of the city said unto Joash, Bring out thy son, that he may die, because he has cast down the altar of Baal, and because he has cut down the grove that was by. And Joash said unto all that stood against him, Will you plead for Baal? Will you save him? He that will plead for him, let him be put to death while it is yet morning. If he be a god, let him plead for himself, because one hath cast down his altar. So we see here that he destroys the altar of the wicked. We hear many times, what can one person do? What can one man do? Well, I submit to you, throughout the Bible history, it was mainly one man that accomplished the greatest of deeds. It was one man that took it upon himself to answer the call of God, to do the things that God wanted him to do. He destroys the altar of the wicked. What was one of the first acts of Christ? Do we remember? Christ goes into the temple, and he sees that they have turned it into a place of business where they're cheating the people. And Jesus went to the temple, cast them out that sold and bought in the temple, overthrew the tables of the money changers and seats of them that sold doves. And he said unto them, It is written, My house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. God, through Gideon, destroys the altar of the wicked. God, through Christ, destroys the altar of those that were in his temple. Destroys the money changers' table. Destroys their livelihood. We must seek to eliminate those things that God hates. That is our responsibility as a people, as a church. As the nation of God, whether it be sin, specifically homosexuality and abortion in our country. Too many times we hear preachers that are afraid to say those things from a pulpit because our nation has politicized these issues. But understand something. Murder of unborn children and homosexuality are not political issues. It doesn't. The love of children and the love of God's design for the home and God's design for marriage is not designated for a political party. It's not a Republican value. It's not a Democrat value. It is a Christian value. And it's one that all Christians must hold dear and must hold sacred in their lives. For less, God has destroyed nations. For less, God has humbled the rulers of those nations. For less, God has completely decimated an entire population of people. Ezekiel 22:30. God said, I sought for a man among them that might make up a hedge, that might stand in the gap before me, that I might not destroy them. But I found none. We, as the children of God, are that hedge. We are the things that stand between God and the destruction of a nation. We are the only thing that keeps this nation afloat. But how long will God allow that to continue if His people are not fighting against those things? God was given a command by God, or Gideon was given a command by God, and he obeyed. God said, I want you to do this. Now, did Gideon know that these people would be angry and upset about what he had done? And the answer is unequivocally yes. People are very passionate about their religions. Just go walk over into Iran sometime and tell them Muhammad was a false prophet and see what that gets you. Go stand in front of one of their mosques and say something about God or Muhammad or their Allah and see what happens in one of those nations. And as Dave correctly pointed out, decapitation. They're very passionate about those things. Do you think that these people are any less passionate? Of course not. Do you remember the story of Jezebel and Ahab? Do you remember what it was that got Jezebel so upset? He was speaking against Baal. He was speaking against her God. It's what got her on all this wickedness and all these things. And yet here we have Gideon, a single man, took his men servants, went up and destroyed this altar. And you saw the repercussions for those actions. They came out and said, we're going to kill him. They came to Joash, his door, and said, "Send out your son, we're going to kill him." He was given a command to save Israel, and he would do so with God's help. Judges 6, verse 33 through 35, we have another account, one of the most famous accounts of Gideon, I think. All the Midianites and Amalekites and the children of the east were gathered together and went over and pitched in the valley of Jezreel. Now, what do you think these people are doing, pitching in the valley of Jezreel? They're going to war. They're going to annihilate Gideon. They're going to annihilate Israel. The Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon, and he blew a trumpet. And Abiezer was gathered after him, and he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who was also gathered after him. He sent messengers unto Asher, and unto Zebulun, and unto Naphtali, and there came up to meet him. So we have a situation now where Israel is about to be attacked. Gideon, the same individual who threw down the altar of Baal, is going to be called upon once again to do the thing that God needs him to do, to save Israel, to be pleasing in the sight of God. And the lesson we learn from this is that God's aid is always available to those that follow Him. God is always there for His children, for His family. And God will always be there till the end of time for those that remain faithful to Him. The Lord shall help them and deliver them. He shall deliver them from the wicked and save them because they trust in Him. The 37th Psalm. One of the things that we understand about our God, or that we ought to understand about our God, is that simply because we cannot physically see Him does not mean He is not here. Because we cannot physically touch Him does not mean that the effects of His actions are not felt. And we need to trust in this God today. We can't wait until our enemies are amassing at our borders, which they already are. We can't wait until the church is being decimated, which it is. We have to begin to trust in God now. We have to begin to take the attitude that God is with us. But Gideon showed his faith in God. His faith in God was seen. And I want you to notice this because I love this particular story. Judges 7. And most of you are familiar with this. So I'm not going to read all of them. Gideon amasses a large army. Okay? I mean, it's a massive army. And God says, too many people. So you go down to verse 2. You know, look at the second part of this. These people are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hand, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand hath saved me. Now therefore go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 20 and 2,000, and there remained 10,000. All right, he's got 32,000 people, 10,000 people are left. God says, all right, 10,000 is enough, right? Nope. Go on a little bit. The Lord said to Gideon, still too many people. Bring them down to the water, and I will try them for thee. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And of whomsoever I say unto thee, this shall go not go with thee, the same shall not go. So he brought down the people into the water, and the Lord said unto Gideon, every one that laugheth of the water with his tongue as a dog laugheth, him shalt thou set by thyself. Likewise every one that boweth down upon his knees to drink. And the number of them that lapped, putting their heads in the mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, by the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand, and let all the other people go into his place. God starts with 32,000 people. He sends home, hold on, give me a minute, 31,000, right? 700. Now, if I'm going into a war, and I'm a general, I'm a commander in an army, I might send home 300 and keep the 31,000, right? Because large numbers. We're afraid of China. Why? Because China can put the most boots on the ground. Billions of people in the nation. Billions of them. So if it came to hand-to-hand combat, China beat us by sheer numbers. And yet, here is God telling Gideon, too many people, Gideon. I appreciate the sentiment, but no. I don't want Israel thinking they've delivered themselves. I want them to know that their deliverance came from me. It came from my hand. Armies are not known to be successful when they're small in number. With God, numbers have never mattered. He said unto him, O my Lord, where shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am least in my father's house. And the Lord said unto him, Surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man. God doesn't care about numbers. That's never been the case with God. Numbers have never mattered. And you need to understand something. As a member of the Church of Christ, you're one of the smallest religions in the world. We are one of the smallest in number in the world, which is appropriate considering Matthew chapter 7, right? Straight is the way, broad is the gate that leadeth unto destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. But straight is the way, and narrow is the path that leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. We understand we're going to be few. It doesn't mean we can't win. But in order to win, we have to be willing to fight. You cannot fight and you cannot win a battle you're not willing to undergo, that you're not willing to fight, that you're not willing to participate in. We cannot win a battle against sin and against Satan if we never take up our sword. We can never win in the battle against sin and against Satan if we don't put on the armor that God has provided for us. Gideon could not have beat the Midianites had he refused to march the 300 to the battlefield. It wouldn't have happened. His faith was seen by his trust in God. Matthew 7, 9 through 15, came to pass the same night, the Lord said to him, Arise, get thee down into the host, for I have delivered into thy hand. But if thou fear to go down, go thou with Phurah thy servant down the host. And thou shalt hear what they say, and afterward thy hand shall be strengthened to go down into the host. Then he went down with Phurah his servant unto the house of the armed men that were in the host. And the Midianites and the Amalekites, all the children of the east, lay along the valley like grasshoppers, for multitudes, and their camels were without number, as sand by the seaside for the multitude. And when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow, and he said, Behold, I dreamed a dream, and lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled in the host of Midian. And it came into a tent and smote it, and it fell, and overturned it, that the tent lay along. And his fellow answered and said, This is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. For into his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the host. And it was so, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream, and the interpretation thereof, that he worshipped, and returned into the host of Israel, and said, Arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian. If he had doubts, God would remove them. Through Gideon's faith in God's power, there was a victory. The 300 blew the trumpets. The Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, even through all the hosts. And the host fled to Bethshittah in Zerath, and the border of Abimahoah, unto Tabah. Now think about that for just a minute. Did you see the sheer number of people that they had? The Amalekites and the Midianites, children of these, lay along the valley like grasshoppers for a multitude. Their camels were without number, as sand by the seaside for the multitude. Here come 300 people blowing on the trumpet. Right? Now, if you're the Amalekites, the Midianites, you're like, seriously? All right, where's the joke? All right, candid camera. Are they amassing behind us? Nope. This is the only group there was. Hundreds of thousands of people, most likely. And yet, the 300 of God sent them running. Through Gideon's faith in God's power, there was victory. God told Gideon at the beginning that he would be victorious. And I want you to understand this. God told you at the beginning of your Christian life you would be victorious. He told you that nobody can stand against you if I am with you. Nobody can stand against you if you follow my will, my word, my way. Nobody can stand against you. God kept His word, and Gideon kept his faith in God. Too many have fought and died to keep this country free. To us, let it go back to the way it was when England ruled and there was persecution from the Roman Catholic Church. When the Catholic Church was the national religion, too much blood, sweat, and tears have gone into making this country great. Too much effort on the part of God in allowing this nation to prosper because of our morals, because of the things that God appreciates in a country. We need to be like Gideon and fight against the evil that's striving to bring a nation down. Too long have we as Christians sat back and said, I'm not getting involved. Too long Christians have sat back and thought there's nothing I can do. Understand, God expects action out of His children. God expects you to do something. Do you like our country? Are you proud to be an American? Do you want this country to stay strong for your children, for your grandchildren? Well, understand, we're not in this fight alone. We have a God in heaven who will help us in this fight if we're willing to put forth the effort to spare this nation. God is looking for men and women to make up a hedge so that He might not destroy this nation. We have to be that hedge. We have to be the people that stands in God's way of destruction. We have to be the people that God looks at and says, it's worth saving. It's worth sparing. There's one thing every great nation in our world has in common that has ever existed, whether it be the Israelites, the Amalekites, the Philistines, the Romans, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Assyrians. They all have one thing in common. Do you know what that is? They've all failed. Every last one of them. We as a nation, yes, we are a superpower. We are the only superpower that exists right now. We are the hegemon, right? We have freedoms that we enjoy in this country on a day-to-day basis, and we've got to thank God for them every day. And thank our brave men and women that fight to keep our freedoms free. We have a freedom to assemble here this morning, to worship as we see fit. There is coming a day when that will not be the case if the country continues the way it's going. There will be a time when I cannot stand in the pulpit and tell you that homosexuality is wrong without fear of going to jail. There is coming a time when we may have to hide in our homes to worship our God. You don't think that's possible? You don't think that day is coming? Understand, the Romans at first tolerated the religions. They tolerated the Jewish religion. They tolerated the Christian religion. But we know what happened. The Jews destroyed. The Christians persecuted. You read the book of Revelation sometime. You see the persecution that's ongoing. You see the troubles and the strife that they're going through. We live in a great nation. We live in the best nation, in my opinion, that's ever existed upon the face of the planet, at least the most powerful. A place where we have the ability to make money. Where poor is a very relative term. Where we have enough food to eat. Where we have cars, we have technology. But most importantly, we have a God that is watching out for us as a nation. Now understand, the United States, and this is where most people make their mistake, is not a Christian nation. It never was. But people like to think that America was a Christian nation. It hasn't been. It never was. We were founded on Judeo-Christian values. That's true. There's no such thing as a Christian nation. And this nation, if we fall away from God, is no more special to Him than Egypt or Iran in the eyes of God. What separates us? Look to your left and right. This is what makes us different. These people sitting beside you, the faithful children of God, are what makes this country different. Or what makes this country strong. And what allows us to do the things that we do on a daily basis. It's not the nuclear weapons we have stored up that spares this nation. It's not the super economy that we have that spares this nation. It is our Father in heaven who has allowed this country to live and allowed this country to thrive. If you want the country that your father and mother had, if you want this country to be as strong for your children as it has been for you, then it's time we Christians stop sitting back and taking it. It's time we stop accepting sin and evil into our lives. It's time we stopped tolerating false doctrine, false ways. It's time we become the children that God would have us be. It's time we became men like Gideon, a mighty man of valor that stood up for God, that stood up for what God wanted, God's will and God's way. If you're here and you're not a child of God, let me encourage you to become one. Join that hedge that keeps this nation strong, that keeps this nation alive and thriving. If you've never obeyed the gospel, the plan is simple. We have to hear what God has said. We have to believe that God exists and that God will reward those who seek after Him. We have to repent of our sins. We have to make the confession we believe Jesus Christ is the Son of God. We have to be willing to submit to baptism, where we have our sins washed away. But as children of God, we understand, as we read throughout Bible times, the children of God, sometimes we make mistakes. We sin. We're not perfect. And God has provided an avenue for us to come back to Him if we're only willing to repent. If you have a need, please come together. We stand and while we sing.
Jesus is tenderly called.